In the golden age of Hollywood, Clark Gable was the king, and Marilyn Monroe was the goddess. They were the embodiments of perfection, the icons of the lavish dreams that millions craved. The public looked at the red carpet and believed it was paradise. However, behind-the-scenes records and testimonies from witnesses of that era paint a starkly different picture. It was a place where stars were stripped of their autonomy, forced to undergo agonizing facial reconstructions, just to become perfect commodities for a profit-driven machine. Even fallen heroes were transformed into media tools by the studios, even as they lay deep within their graves. In the end, what was the true price of Hollywood immortality? And how did those slave contracts crush the human beings behind the legends? Join me as we turn back the pages of history to decode the 8 buried secrets in this video. Subscribe now to decode the buried secrets of Hollywood. 1. Marilyn Monroe, manufacturing an icon, the ultimate slave contract. If you search for the name Norma Jean in the Hollywood archives, you will find only a vast, empty void. This is the result of one of the most brutal identity erasures in history. For the world to have a radiant Marilyn Monroe, the cinematic empire had to annihilate a flesh-and-blood human being. This was not a journey to the stars, but a commodity production process governed by a slave contract. In the documents that narrowly escaped the incinerator, a comprehensive refurbishment plan devised by the studio for Marilyn is revealed. Back then, she was just a young girl with natural features, but in the eyes of the studio moguls, she was an obsolete raw draft. A strategy of forced procedures was immediately executed. They did not ask what she wanted, they issued orders. The files record stringent demands to alter her facial structure from her nose to her jawline to achieve a fabricated golden ratio. Even Norma Jean's natural brown hair was deemed a mistake, requiring chemical bleaching until it glowed with a cold platinum sheen. She was forbidden from keeping any trace of her past. Norma Jean had to die so that Marilyn Monroe could be born from the test tubes of the industry's lawmakers. Cruelty did not stop at appearance. To control a global icon, the studio needed a submissive entity. Marilyn constantly faced immense pressure on set, where she was treated as an untiring, money-printing machine. When anxiety struck instead of empathy, the studio provided magic pills. The half-burned documents reveal a grim truth. The use of sedatives was not a personal choice, but a method for the studio to maintain a state of artificial alertness during her 18-hour workdays. They turned her into a person suspended in a permanent haze to be easily manipulated on the chessboard of profit. As Marilyn stood before the lens with a smile that captivated the world, few knew that behind it was a soul withered by the deprivation of her most basic autonomy. The contract Marilyn signed was in reality an invisible noose. She was forced into an extreme mold of naivety. The studio controlled everything from the way she breathed and spoke to the people she was permitted to meet. Every movement was calculated to satisfy the public's palate, turning her into a prisoner of her own aura. More terrifyingly, when Marilyn began to seek an escape from her doll image to pursue true art, the system responded with cold-blooded hostility. They isolated her, slandered her as difficult, and sought to stifle her voice. Marilyn Monroe was no longer an artist. She was an asset gradually depreciating in the eyes of investors. Marilyn Monroe's passing is often cited as a suicide born of loneliness. But a look into the hidden files reveals the inevitable collapse of an overexploited product. She did not simply leave, she was crushed by a heartless machine. When her life ended, the studio did not stop. They proceeded to execute a perfect finale script. Adverse information was incinerated, evidence of manipulation was erased, and in its place, an immortal legend of the tragically gone forever glamorous icon was born. Her departure was the final transaction Hollywood made to guarantee the brand value of Marilyn Monroe forever. She lived as a project and laid down as the most elaborately staged screenplay. The file on Marilyn's flawless beauty has turned to ash, But beneath those glowing embers, another secret emerges about the man dubbed the King of Hollywood, who possessed a smile that shook the world yet harbored a decaying obsession. 2. Clark Gable, the Toothless King and the Memory Erasure Campaign. In the radiant glow of Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler emerges with an arrogant masculinity and a lethal, charming smile. But look closely at those frames. Behind Clark Gable's confident smirk lies one of the greatest deceptions ever orchestrated by MGM Studios. The King of Hollywood was in fact a toothless man, and his million-dollar smile was merely the product of a ruthless memory erasure campaign. In 1933, as Gable's career reached its zenith, a terrifying secret was entered into the studio's top-secret files. His entire set of teeth had been destroyed. Surviving records reveal that due to childhood malnutrition and a total neglect of personal hygiene, Gable suffered from gum infections so severe they were beyond salvage. At just 32 years old, the world's most glamorous leading man faced the prospect of losing his smile, the very weapon that made MGM's fortunes. Rather than let this truth surface, the studio moguls decided to execute a forced appearance alteration. They whisked Gable away to a private dentist under the strict surveillance of fixers. His entire set of natural teeth was extracted and replaced with an expensive set of dentures meticulously crafted with the primitive technology of the era. The studio transformed decay into artificial beauty, but the price of this perfection was bitter. To ensure the public never discovered this flaw, MGM launched the largest photo collection and destruction campaign in history. They sent agents to scour every newsroom and archive, buying up every original photograph of Gable's real smile taken before 1933. Fragments of history documenting a young man with crooked, imperfect teeth were tossed into the furnace without mercy. MGM manufactured a false reality where Clark Gable was eternally flawless. They wanted the audience to believe he was born a god, that his smile was immortal and untainted. Anyone who dared mention Gable's dentures was met with threats or bribes from the studio. This wasn't just about protecting an individual's reputation. It was about safeguarding a restrictive contract that Gable had signed with his own personal freedom. He was forced to live behind a polished mask, never allowed to reveal the truth that he was aging and decaying from within. The most chilling truth did not lie in the incinerated photos, but in the king's breath. The dentures of that time, crafted from primitive materials and combined with Gable's heavy smoking habit, produced a scent of death whenever he opened his mouth. The diaries of famous female co-stars frequently mentioned the distress of having to perform passionate kissing scenes with him. They spoke of having to hold their breath, struggling not to gag when faced directly with the breath of the world's most desirable man. Yet the studio gave the order silence. Every complaint was instantly stifled with career-ending threats. Gable knew this well, and the forced silence of those around him turned him into a lonely figure within his own image. He was imprisoned between the adoration of millions of naive women and the quiet disgust of those closest to him. Until the very final moments of his life, Gable could never escape his own shadow. The studio had built an immortal Rhett Butler, and they forced Gable to carry that mask to the grave. Even after his passing, funeral photographs were strictly controlled to ensure his posture did not betray the truth about his dentures. Clark Gable lived his life as a stunt double for himself. That smile, that gaze, they were in essence a screenplay spanning 3 decades. When his file was tossed into the fire, the remaining ash was not gold, but the fragments of dentures and lies wrapped in silk. Hollywood created a king, but Hollywood also stripped him of his right to be a real human being with the most ordinary of flaws. As Clark Gable's artificial smile fades into the embers, the clinking chains of another small money printing machine begin to echo, opening the file of a young girl named Dorothy, who found the Wizard of Oz only to be imprisoned by the demons of Hollywood in a living nightmare. 3. Judy Garland, the Chained Money Machine. Cinema history forever remembers Judy Garland with her sparkling wide eyes and her soaring voice on the yellow brick road. But within the charred, partially destroyed files of MGM Studios, one finds no music, only the brutal mandates of a literal slave contract. Judy was not a star to be nurtured. She was an asset to be wrung dry to the marrow, a profit-making machine shackled by the greed of studio moguls. Starting at the age of just 13, Judy was subjected to a harsh, forced appearance alteration process. The studio deemed her face not sharp enough and her figure not slender enough compared to their distorted aesthetic standards. To keep Judy looking like an innocent child, even as she entered puberty, executives ordered her to wear corsets cinched so tight they made it difficult to breathe every time she was on camera. There are even chilling records of the studio considering and applying extreme medical methods to stunt her natural growth. They did not need a grown woman. They needed an eternal doll. Every natural physiological trait Judy possessed was viewed as an obstacle to profit, leading to a direct assault on the body of a minor under the guise of art. The burned files revealed a horrifying menu prescribed by the studio for Judy to sustain an 18-hour-a-day work intensity. To ensure she had enough energy to dance on set studio, doctors forced her to use powerful stimulants every morning. When night fell and her body trembled with exhaustion, yet could not sleep, they forced her to take sedatives to shut down the machine. This chemical cycle was no accident. It was a systematic operating procedure. The studio needed Judy to function like an untiring engine, regardless of how these substances were gradually destroying her nervous system and mind. Behind the hopeful voice in Over the Rainbow was a young girl living in a state of suspension, half awake and half dreaming, deprived of the basic human right to rest. This was the cruelest form of exploitation, where a star's life was weighed against the box office receipts. MGM's cruelty went even further through a seamless surveillance network. Judy was placed under 24/7 control by studio monitors. Fragments of documents record shocking details. Studio employees stood watch directly outside restroom doors or restaurants to ensure she did not eat anything outside the designated zero-calorie menu. She was frequently starved, permitted only black coffee and cigarettes to suppress her appetite. Any slight weight gain was treated as a breach of contract and punished with verbal abuse regarding her appearance. Judy Garland lived amidst glory, but was in truth a starving prisoner, stripped of the most fundamental human powers to eat and to move freely. The studio built a wall of fear around her, making her believe that without them, she was nothing, even though she was the one sustaining the entire empire. Until the end of her life, Judy Garland never escaped the ghost of MGM. The chains of medication and psychological manipulation had seeped deep into her flesh and blood. When she was no longer capable of generating massive profits, the studio discarded her like an obsolete object, leaving behind a broken woman with irreparable psychological scars. Her later passing was not merely a medical accident. It was the foreseen departure of a product that had been exploited to the final drop. Hollywood took Judy's childhood, her health, and her very identity in exchange for an immortal icon. As the files on her life are incinerated, the acrid scent of burning paper still seems to carry the silent sobs of the little girl under the spotlight, the one who gave dreams to the world but lived in a reality shackled until her very last breath. The roar of a rebel's engine has just faded on the highway, and now Hollywood's fireplace begins to consume the final contracts, opening the file on James Dean, where a corpse proved even more profitable than a living star. 4. James Dean, the constructed death and profiteering from the grave. World cinema idolizes James Dean as the eternal symbol of freedom and rebellion. Yet when turning over the charred fragments of studio files following his 1955 accident, a different reality emerges, one far colder and more calculating. James Dean was not merely a talented actor. To the studio, he was a product line. that required profit optimization even after his heart had stopped beating. This is the clearest evidence of a finale script orchestrated to transform a personal tragedy into a bottomless gold mine. James Dean departed at the absolute zenith of his career, leaving behind unreleased films. Instead of expressing sincere grief, studio executives held emergency meetings to execute an erasure campaign of unfavorable information, replacing it with a carefully painted legend. They realized that a deceased star would never age, never cause trouble, and most importantly, never be able to object to how their image was exploited. The files record haunting marketing schemes. The studio hired voice lookalikes to impersonate James Dean in exclusive radio interviews. They created the illusion that he was still present, speaking to fans from some distant, ethereal space. This was not a tribute, but a method of emotional manipulation, forcing audiences to flock to theaters in search of the final pieces of a fallen hero. To amplify the mystery and allure of the James Dean brand, the studio skillfully wove supernatural elements into his narrative. The curse of the little bastard, the car forever linked to Dean's fatal destiny, was systematically disseminated. Secret documents show that the studio covertly encouraged and provided material to tabloids to build a network of rumors regarding bizarre phenomena surrounding the vehicle. They transformed a simple traffic accident into an event of predestined fate, the charted tragedy of a genius. By nurturing spiritual curiosity, they kept James Dean's name at the very center of public discourse. The more the public feared and wondered about the curse, the more the value of his films and memorabilia skyrocketed. James Dean was repackaged by the studio, turned into a mystical icon, rather than a flesh and blood man with very real pain. The system's cruelty was further evidenced by the establishment and control of fan clubs after his passing. Burnt papers reveal that the studio dispatched plants to infiltrate fan circles, secretly guiding memorial activities in directions favorable to film promotion. They staged fake seances where messages of love purportedly sent from Dean were in fact scripts pre-written by PR specialists. Their goal was to maintain a state of extreme obsession within the fan community. They sought to turn James Dean into a saint, a spiritual guide for the youth. As long as fans believed their idol was still communicating from the afterlife, they would not hesitate to spend money on any product bearing the James Dean label. This was the most sophisticated exploitation of faith, where the studio possessed not only the image, but the very memory of the public. James Dean lived as a rebel seeking to escape all constraints, yet ironically, after death he became Hollywood's most perfect prisoner. He no longer held control over his legacy, no longer had a voice to protest the deceptions committed in his name. Every action, every word from his past was cut and edited to serve the rebel without a cause archetype that the studio had framed. The death of James Dean was the most successful transaction for the industry's lawmakers of that era. As his files gradually turn to ash, what remains is not the truth of a young man passionate about speed, but a meticulously constructed reality. James Dean became immortal, not just because of his talent, but because Hollywood turned his departure into an eternal, restrictive contract, forcing him to serve this illusion factory forever, from deep within the grave. The portrait of an eternal rebel has just closed, but right beneath those ashes lies the file of another perfect face that was shattered, opening the tragedy of Montgomery Clift, the man who had to live the rest of his life as a ghost within his own body. 5. Montgomery Clift, the monster in the mirror, the tragedy of deception. Hollywood has always hungered for flawless faces, and Montgomery Clift was once the gold standard of that beauty. But after one fateful night on a foggy slope in 1956, when his car slammed into a utility pole, the entire glittering reality surrounding him shattered. What the studio executed afterward was not a devoted rescue, but a process of forced procedures aimed at refurbishing a damaged piece of merchandise. To the executives, Montgomery Clift was not allowed to be an injured human being. He had to remain a glamorous matinee idol even as his soul splintered along with his original face. In the secret document salvaged from the incinerator, cold mandates regarding the restructuring of Clift's appearance were found. After the accident, his face was severely disfigured, yet the studio granted him neither time for recovery nor the right to privacy. They feared that a chipped ornament would diminish box office receipts. A team of doctors was assigned to perform complex cosmetic interventions even before he had fully regained consciousness. This was not mere plastic surgery, it was a forced appearance alteration to maintain the value of a restrictive contract. The studio wanted to patch up what was left so he could swiftly return to the set of Raintree County. They attempted to manufacture a clone of the old Montgomery Clift, but the result was only a vacant, emotionless face, laden with psychological scars that heavy layers of makeup could never hide. When Clift returned to the set, he was met not with sympathy, but with harsh technical demands. The studio ordered cinematographers and lighting directors to execute a sophisticated cover-up campaign. They forced him to stand only at specific angles, usually the left side of his face, which was less damaged, and utilized extreme lighting to blur the indentations of the botched surgeries. Every workday for Clift was a form of mental torture. He had to see himself filtered through deceitful lenses. The studio cared nothing for his physical agony. They only cared that the audience did not perceive the change. This created a horrific psychological state. Clift felt like an imposter playing himself. The deception reached a crescendo when he had to stand beside glamorous co-stars, while he himself could feel every fiber of his face expressing a pain that the studio's lens deliberately refused to record. The system's brutality also lay in how they manipulated public perception of Clift's decline. Incinerated files revealed that the studio actively suppressed all information regarding the severity of his injuries. They released press statements claiming he suffered only minor scratches and remained in peak form. This lie robbed Clift of the right to have his pain acknowledged by the world. Forced to uphold the image of a dashing star while his face and soul were in ruins, Clift began a downward spiral into a vortex of painkillers and sedative substances the studio was once again ready to provide to keep him standing before the camera. They turned him into a living ghost, a man who had to look in the mirror every day and question his own identity. Montgomery Clift was no longer a free artist. He was a prisoner of artificial perfection, a slave to a face he no longer recognized. Many call the 10 numb following Clift's accident the longest suicide in Hollywood history. But looking back at the confidential files, it was in fact the slow sediment of an eroded product. The studio wrung out whatever remained of his withered face until it no longer generated profit, then abandoned him to sink into the darkness of loneliness and addiction. His death at age 45 was not a sudden tragedy, but the final liberation from a restrictive contract that had bound him to a fabricated reality. Hollywood created a god, but when that god's wings broke, they tried to glue them back with cheap plastic just to perform a few more shows. As Montgomery Clift's file vanishes into the flames, what remains is the melancholic gaze of a man stripped of his true face in exchange for a mournful legend under the colored lights. As the fractured face of Montgomery Clift sinks entirely into the darkness, the sound of flipping through altered forensic reports echoes from the locked room of Eddie Mannix, the man who holds the master key to conjure the most brutal truths into mere ash. 6. Eddie Mannix, the fixer, the cleaner of corpses. In the golden era of Hollywood, stars might have been gods on screen, but Eddie Mannix was the one who held the power of life and death in reality. Under the title of vice president at MGM, Mannix wasn't hired to produce films. He was hired to execute crime eradication missions. With the coldness of a veteran player and a tangled web of connections, Mannix was the architect behind fabricated finale scripts, transforming shocking scandals into harmless news snippets by the following morning. In the pages of documents that narrowly escaped destruction, Eddie Mannix's name consistently appears alongside highly suspicious deaths. The most notorious case is that of George Reeves, the actor who first portrayed Superman. When Reeves was found breathless at his home, every sign at the scene raised questions for even the most honest investigators. However, before the police could even set up a perimeter, the fixer had already arrived. Mannix employed a sophisticated death construction tactic. He leveraged his power to influence witnesses, bribe forensic departments, and steer public opinion through the tabloids he held in the palm of his hand. Every detail detrimental to the studio's pristine image was excised or replaced with a self-inflicted tragedy due to depression narrative. To Mannix, the truth was malleable, and a homicide could easily become a personal misfortune if staged by a sufficiently powerful hand. Eddie Mannix did not act alone. He operated a professional network of fixers specialists hired to clean up the remnants of debaucherous parties or the personal transgressions of stars. Half-burnt files reveal the existence of restrictive moral contracts where young actresses were coerced into following ruthless directives to protect the virtuous image the studio had manufactured. Whenever a star became entangled in legal troubles or personal issues that could damage brand value, Mannix would intervene with radical solutions. He was willing to use money and clout to force artists into clandestine medical procedures or to make them vanish from the public eye for long periods. This was a terrifying form of exploitation, where the studio possessed not only the talent, but also the artist's deepest secrets, turning them into puppets submissive to every command in exchange for their existence in the entertainment industry. Mannix's true power lay in his ability to turn the legal system into a tool for the studio. Charred scraps of paper show massive expenditures listed as public relations costs for local officials and law enforcement. Every time a star was arrested for misconduct, Mannix would often appear at the police station before a lawyer even arrived. The files record cases where critical evidence went missing, mysteriously, or indictments were withdrawn without clear reason. Mannix turned Hollywood into an impenetrable fortress where sins were covered by stacks of cash and veiled threats. He didn't just protect the star, he protected an entire economic empire built on falsehood. The silence of the justice system at that time was the fixer's greatest triumph, creating a perfect shroud for the grim realities behind the glamour. Eddie Mannix lived and worked like a power-hungry ghost, one who knew exactly where every body, both literal and figurative, was buried in Hollywood history. As he aged, those secrets became a spiritual burden that no incinerator could ever fully erase. The name Mannix is synonymous with an era where justice was eclipsed by profit, and human life was sometimes valued only by the worth of a contract. Mannix's legacy is a chilling testament to how Hollywood operated as an autonomous state with its own laws. His files, when tossed into the fire, still emit a pungent scent of manipulation and dark power. Eddie Mannix taught the world a bitter lesson in the illusion factory. The truth is not the most important thing, it is who has the power to rewrite it. As case file number 6 closes, we realize that the most terrifying villains weren't the monsters on screen, but the men behind the desks ready to sweep clean the crime scenes of every shattered dream. The darkness from Eddie Mannix's office has just faded, but another cold mist descends upon the first Oscar awarded to a person of color, opening the file on Hattie McDaniel, the woman who stood at the peak of glory, but was cast out by the system into shadows devoid of light. 7. Hattie McDaniel, an Oscar in the shadows. In 1940, at the 12th Academy Awards, history called the name of Hattie McDaniel for her role in Gone with the Wind. It should have been a moment of supreme triumph, a milestone erasing the boundaries of cinema. But when digging into the pages hidden beneath that radiance, a brutal truth about how Hollywood operated is unearthed. Hattie was not treated like a legend. She was imprisoned in a restrictive honor contract where the color of her skin became a pretext for the studio to carry out blatant acts of discrimination. In the archives concerning that awards night, there is a detail filmmakers always seek to downplay: Hattie's seating. Despite being a formidable contender, and ultimately the winner, she was not permitted to sit at the same table as her white co-stars like Clark Gable or Vivian Leigh. The studio compromised with the harsh racial codes of the era, relegating her to a small, solitary table in a distant corner of the room. This was no accidental seating arrangement. It was a positional manipulation tactic to maintain the systemic hierarchy. The studio needed her talent to secure the trophy, but they were unwilling to defend her dignity against social prejudice. Hattie had to step up to accept her Oscar from the margins, proof that Hollywood could grant you artistic recognition while simultaneously stripping you of the most basic right to respect. The system's cruelty also lay in the typecasting of Hattie's career. Half-burnt files reveal backroom deals where she was coerced into roles as domestic servants, as supporting characters devoid of psychological depth, designed solely to satisfy the biased gaze of the masses. The studio executed a form of creative slave contract, preventing her from exploring more diverse, substantial roles. Every time Hattie fought to change her image, she hit a cold wall of management. They wanted her to remain a safe stereotype that caused no ripples in the social fabric. She was trapped between accepting demeaning roles for an income and being criticized by her own community. Hollywood exploited her image to the fullest, but refused to hand her the key to artistic freedom. The peak of exploitation occurred even after Hattie had left this world. In her final will, she expressed a simple wish to be buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, the resting place of her peers and greatest stars. However, legal records document a heartbreaking truth. This request was flatly denied by the cemetery management, met with a chilling silence from her former studio. They took her talent, her devotion, and her fame to enrich classic cinema, yet refused her a place beside those she had worked with her entire life. This rejection was the final cut into a turbulent career, proving that Hollywood only valued the artist's commercial worth while they could still stand before a lens. As the velvet curtain closed, promises of equality and camaraderie became nothing more than scraps of paper blown away by the wind. Hattie McDaniel passed away in loneliness and poverty, despite being part of the highest-grossing film of all time. Her Oscar statuette subsequently vanished mysteriously, as if the system wished to erase every trace of a woman who dared to break barriers only to be crushed by them. As the files on Hattie turn to ash, what remains is the haunting of an industry built on injustice. Hollywood created brilliant dreams for a global audience, but for those like Hattie, that dream always carried too high a price and a boundary that could never be crossed. She became a legend, but a mournful one, a testament to sacrifice and the ingratitude of a golden age riddled with unwashed shadows. The velvet curtain closes on Hattie McDaniel's solitary golden statuette, but in the very heart of the cinematic capital, another ghost emerges from the depths of despair, unsealing the final case file of Peg Entwistle, the woman who gave her life to carve her name into the immortal symbol of Hollywood. 8. Peg Entwistle, the ghost beneath the H. Hollywood Land. The original name of cinema's most powerful symbol was built not only of wood and steel, but of shattered dreams. Among the thousands who came seeking the spotlight, Peg Entwistle is the name synonymous with a predestined tragedy. Her story lies not in romantic frames, but in forensic reports buried beneath the giant letter H. This is the file of a woman who became immortal, not through a career-defining role, but through the most brutal finale script she authored herself, amidst the darkness of abandonment. In 1932, Peg Entwistle was a talented stage actress who arrived in the Promised Land, hoping to change her fate. However, Hollywood at that time was no place for sensitive souls. Scorched files reveal the grueling casting calls where she was repeatedly rejected for not fitting the instant gratification standards of the major studios. She was trapped in a restrictive contract of expectations and profound disappointment, as promises of a brilliant career withered away. The system's cruelty lay in creating an illusion of opportunity while suffocating those who could not generate immediate profit. Peg found herself pushed to the fringes of the cinematic machine, becoming an invisible figure in a city that never sleeps. That loneliness was not just a personal feeling, it was a systemic erosion of the spirit for anyone who dared to challenge the cinematic empires without a powerful protector. On that fateful September night, Peg climbed to the top of Mount Lee, standing atop the 45-foot H of the Hollywood land sign to take her final step. What remained at the scene was only a velvet purse, a pair of high heels, and a note filled with agony. She wanted to escape a deceptive reality where smiles were bought and fame was constructed on falsehoods. But the most macabre and bizarre truth emerged only the following day. In the stack of mail delivered to her home after she was gone was an offer for a lead role in a major stage production. Terrifyingly, the character she was invited to play was a woman seeking to end her life out of desperation. Hollywood granted her the opportunity she craved only after she had surrendered it, a cruel joke of fate orchestrated by an invisible hand. That letter became a haunting fragment of her file, proof that in this place, glory and tragedy are often but a breath apart. Following Peg's departure, Hollywood did not pause for a memorial. Instead, it swiftly turned her story into an urban legend to fuel public curiosity. Files record a litany of reports regarding strange phenomena around the H. Many claimed to see a woman in 1930s attire the faint scent of Gardenia Peg's signature perfume, lingering in the Hollywood Hills mist. The studio system on one hand sought to erase negative details to protect the paradise image, while on the other covertly allowed these ghostly tales to spread to maintain a mysterious allure for their icon. Peg Entwistle became a part of Hollywood's architecture, a ghost representing all who were crushed by the colored lights. She was no longer a human being. She became a symbol of eternal failure, a cold reminder to anyone seeking to enter this high-stakes game. Peg Entwistle died in silence, but she achieved what millions of other actors never would: an eternal remembrance tied to the industry's ultimate symbol. The files on her, when cast into the fire, always seemed to emit an inexplicable chill. Hollywood refused her a place while she lived, but forced her to remain forever beneath its brightest letters to guard its darkest secrets. As case file number 8 closes and turns to ash, we realize that Hollywood does not just produce films, it produces haunted souls. Peg is the true face behind the grease paint of the cinematic capital, a face of despair, of futile effort, and a finale that never finds its happy ending. Hollywoodland now has only 9 letters, but the darkness Peg left behind will always be an inseparable part of that radiance, reminding us in the brightest places the shadows are the deepest. 8 files have turned to ash, but their echoes still linger behind the classic films you watch every day. Golden Age Hollywood was not just about silk and million-dollar smiles. It was a cemetery of shackled dreams, reconstructed faces, and distorted truths. Thank you for joining me in unsealing these forbidden files. Never forget that sometimes the most bizarre truths are the ones that must be burned the most. If you feel these secrets have enough power to shake your perspective on the capital of cinema, leave your mark below. There are many more secret vaults we must infiltrate in the days to come. I will see you again in the darkness of the untold truths.